If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this, people who have experienced crazy sightings, cryptids, stairs in the woods, dogman, etc., what are your stories? I moved into a new place around 15 and kept hearing scratching noises and rustling outside. I always assumed it was animals. One year, we had to put up some defense on the window, don't remember why, and my father said the grass and bushes around my window were like how a carpet is after you step on it, and he said that the tracks belonged to either a human or something with human feet. This was years after the first time I heard the rustling and scratching. To know that someone was outside my window still terrifies me. Driving on the highway in Ontario, Canada late in the night. We pulled over off the highway so one of us could make a pit stop. As my friend was urinating, I saw a tall figure in the trees walking around. It started getting closer to my friend who was just off the highway in the bush. I rolled down the window and told my friend, "There's something in the trees coming at you, get back to the car." My friend sees it and decides to whistle at it. Sure enough, the thing whistles back. It sounded like it was whistling and humming at the same time. My friend yelled in terror and ran back to the car. We were out of there fast down the highway. I spend a lot of time in the woods. Nowadays I live right beside two gorgeous mountains. But before I moved here I had a week's winter solo survival thing planned for myself in a remote forest a couple of hours from where I lived. Now, I felt spooked for some reason when I got there. I had to hike the large marshlands, old deep woods and hostile terrain for 2 days before I got to the lake that was going to be my home for a couple of days. It was hellish. I used to be in my country's special forces, but even this was harsh. The whole time everything felt weird. Like there was static in the air. I barely heard or saw any wildlife at all. The first night I saw something that would rattle me. I heard wheezing and coughing sounds from the woods when night had fallen. I tried calling out, first to see if anyone needed help, but after a while I was so scared I stopped. I held my hatchet in one hand, knife in the other, and sat by my fire scared shitless. Mind you, there was no road leading here, no houses, no nothing. Then I saw something at the edge of the clearing I was in. It looked like an old lady walking on her hands naked. She faced away from me but walked sideways. I tried shouting but it felt like I was being choked. I only saw her for a couple of seconds. I stayed awake until the sun rose on the horizon, packed my shit and ran the 2-day hike to the nearest road in 9 hours. When I reached the road, I collapsed, vomited on myself and was found by a farmer going past in his tractor. He asked me if I had been in the woods. When I told him I had, he said that the people in the vicinity didn't go into the woods after nightfall, and to never return. This happened when I was 4 to 5 years old, I guess. My brother and I got grounded because we go outside and play yesterday. We're stuck in living room and trying to entertain ourselves. My parents and baby sister are sleeping in the bedroom. We got bored and just doing random stuff, then my brother peeped through the hole in the bedroom door, the doorknob got removed, and he suddenly got pale and looked at me. He told me he saw something by our father's knee. I didn't believe him because he likes to play pranks with me, yet I still looked through the hole. I saw a severed head. He got hair in some part of his head like nah old person, and his hair is kind of long, can reach along the neck. He got no eyes and mouth. I swear my body froze for a second after I saw that. I stopped looking and then looked at my brother and we're both shocked. After some seconds have passed, I look through the hole again and the head is facing my way. We immediately run and cover ourselves with blanket. I gotta sleep and when I wake up, I'm burning up. To this day, we don't know what that thing is. I found a doorway in the woods once. It was on a mountain trail behind my campus, and while I'd walked that trail probably a dozen times before this point, I'd never seen it before. Something to note about this trail, there's a lot of old ruins nearby, so fragments of buildings, usually doorways or parts of stairs, were not uncommon. However, it was always clear that these were fragments. They were made out of stone, in the style of old castles and houses, and they were usually attached to wall pieces as well. Basically, it was clear that they used to be part of a building. This doorway was different. For a start, it was just a door frame and a door, no attaching wall ruins. As well as this, the door seemed very modern. It was painted green, and the door handle was metal with a keyhole. It looked like an ordinary modern house door. Grass had grown up around the bottom, implying it had been there for a while. Like I said, I'd never seen it before despite having walked the trail a few times. I couldn't have missed it, either. It was right on the narrow trail, completely across the track walked into the grass. There was plenty of room to walk up onto the verge and go around it, but I was curious and it was slightly ajar, so I opened it fully, having to drag it through the grass and dirt that had built up around the door's base, and stepped through it. Immediately something felt off. The best way to describe it is like strong deja vu. Everything took on a weird, dreamlike atmosphere and I felt slightly outside of my own body. The trail looked the same ahead of me, but it all flickered like in heat haze, and the colors were very saturated. The strange dream feeling faded slightly and I was overcome with sudden dread. I darted back through the door again. Immediately everything felt normal. I looked through the door from where I was now standing, and the trail also looked normal. I closed the door and walked around it, and nothing strange happened for the rest of the walk. I went back up the trail several more times, but never saw the door again. A lot of freaky shit happened on that mountain. Grew up in northern Ontario as well, and spent a lot of time in the bush growing up. I remember walking with friends near one of their camps. I would have been 10, and one of our friends saw a figure up on a ledge. I turned my head up to see something large and black or brown disappear from view. We were then pelted with chunks of shale for about 10 minutes as we cowered behind some boulders. Some of the chunks hurled down were pretty huge. Another time I was in the bush with my uncle. He'd grown up outdoors and knew every animal, and their behaviors. The man could track them. We were walking along a creek looking for rainbow trout and heard a series of screams off in the distance. I was terrified, he was perplexed. They didn't sound human, nor did they sound like any of the native animals of the region. They went on for a few minutes and disappeared. Several minutes later they started again, except now they were about 100 ducking feet away. Needless to say, we made it back to the truck fast. I think a lot of people don't understand just how massive swathes of Canada are. Emo, a yet undiscovered animal, could be living in there with ease, especially if it has the capacity to recognize and avoid humans. Okay, this might sound too crazy, but here's my story. When I was like 12, my best friend had a B-day party. It all went completely normal at first. We watched a movie, played some games. It was planned that we stay the night, for that day, so nobody worried about time. Near our town there is a huge forest. It's basically surrounding us. So in the eve we decided to play a little outside and went out with our torches to enter the forest. After a while, it was completely dark. Nobody gave a shit, because we were in a group, but well. Suddenly we weren't in a group at all. Me and my best friend separated from the group, still weren't bothered at all, cause we were laughing the whole time. We were just talking and suddenly an extreme bright light appeared, almost right above us. Sounds, like those of Minecraft Endermans, were coming from all around us. And a man was floating around in the upper trees, right above our heads. It wasn't a normal man, he was completely white, like real white, no shades, nothing like an unrendered object. And everything was normal again. My friend and myself looked in each other's face. My friend's nose was bleeding heavily, and he looked like he had a heart attack. I wonder what I was looking like, but we ran back to his house, where apparently the others already waited for us. We must have been screaming intensely, because the others were looking extremely curious and his mother was also scared to hell. As we told the others, it seemed like everybody believed us, but later on everybody made jokes about it, saying we only saw an owl or something. Still shivers me when it gets dark. I haven't entered the forest till last week. Almost threw up because of panic. When I was a kid, I used to see this really old man and a little girl in my basement. I had a pretty vivid imagination, so my parents just kinda passed it off as another imaginary friend. Their names were Tom and Alyssa, and the little girl always seemed lonely and sad, always wanted to play. I stopped seeing them when I got a bit older, probably around 10 to 11. When I got to be about 17, I was assaulted, resulting in PTSD diagnosis a few years later, but it went completely untreated from about 17 to 20. During that time period, I began to see Tom again without the little girl, sitting on the couch glowering at me, or his bloated dead body flopping out of the closet, or standing in my sister's room. Have a history of hallucinations in my family, so obviously I thought I was just ducked. I talked to my dad about it maybe a year ago, and it turns out a man named Tom used to live in my house before us. Didn't have a daughter, but he was real creepy and rented the basement. Then I had a sleepover with a girlfriend, and I saw Tom looming in a doorway in the basement. I thought not too much of it, was more like duck off Tom, until she looked at me and asked if I saw the guy in the doorway. She saw him too. Ended up not sleeping much that night. An aside, I see shadow people semi-regularly. Mostly benign, but once one got very large while me and a few friends were lurking at a graveyard, and no one else saw it. I started backing away and it caressed their heads and looked at me? They don't have faces, but it was still really discomforting. Out the back of the suburb I lived in was a small mountain. It had a pretty clear path through the bush leading to the top, and I liked to go up there cause the view of the area was amazing. The path leading up also continued on some way, but I'd never taken it before cause I'd always gotten a really weird feeling. One day I took a friend up with me and she wanted to continue along the path from the view site. We walked for another hour-ish and both her and I were getting progressively more sluggish. I started to get a migraine and she threw up in one of the bushes. We turned around before reaching the end, but not before seeing a flipped car down the other end of the mountain. I went up one last time after that, with a different friend of mine. We got up to the viewpoint, but even just being there was giving me a horrible feeling and my friend was starting to feel bad as well. We decided to leave very quickly, but on our way down the path I saw something. A tall black figure very close to us just behind one of the bushes. I felt like I was having a heart attack, I was so scared. At the same time my friend grabs me and starts running down the path like hell is at her heels. We get the bottom panting and having nearly fallen several times, we didn't stop till that horrible sickly feeling had gone away. I asked her why she grabbed me and she started describing seeing a tall black silhouette-like figure of a man behind us. I never went up that mountain again. When I went to stay with my uncle for the weekend, we took his dog for a walk 3 times a day, once in the morning, once before lunch and one at like 10 to 11 p.m. So he lives in a rural area of England, like lots of farms, tight country lanes, and at night it gets very dark. So we come along to a small fence, he lifts the dog over and I just hop over as I'm pretty tall. We start walking along and end up in an orchard. As it gets darker, I turn my phone light on and look around. I feel as if something is watching me but could feel it was quite close. I look to left and down the aisles of trees I see something very tall and humanoid walk past, as if it was following me and my uncle. I turned to him and said, "Did you see that too?" and I point to the trees, and he replied with kind of yeah. We carry on walking and get to near the end. He sees the trees sway, as do I. The humanoid being was watching us. It must have been at least 8 foot tall. It was staring back at us, and as the dog started barking in its direction, the being walked off after the dog stopped barking. Back in the late 80s, we went on a field trip in the rural Midwest to a lake. We spent the day hiking, fishing, sunbathing, whatever. However, on the way there, we were on a school bus on a backcountry road. There were 2 cylindrical-shaped or cigar-shaped things in the sky. They looked metallic. They were quite some distance away, but they looked ducking massive, like a half-dozen large passenger airplanes, end-to-end type massive, probably bigger than that. I grew up on the ocean and am fully aware without a frame of reference it is tough to judge size and distance of large objects. The surface looked to have shading and slight differences in appearance, like maybe the object wasn't smooth, but no wings or other aircraft features. The only frame of reference I had was a big-ass hill. These things were behind the hill and seemed just as big. The funny thing is everyone saw them but no one wanted to acknowledge it.
For a second, I thought I was seeing shit and was going to ask the kid next to me if he saw it, but I looked and saw him staring at them.
I asked him what they were and got a shrug and I don't know. I wish there was a cool ending, like we were shot at by lasers or we were abducted and forced to fight to the death, but we just drove and eventually they were out of sight. What were they? I have no idea. I have never seen anything that sized in the sky before or since, much less 2 of them. I've worked at racetracks and seen blimps overhead and that isn't even close for size. I've worked at airports and even the biggest planes aren't close. The science part of me will always wonder what those were, but the rational part of me knows I'll never find the answer. I've been seeing a lot of sleep paralysis stories and I'll raise you my experience. The first time I had any sort of sleep paralysis was when I was 4 years old. I put it in quotes because it felt more like a dream, not as real as my normal sleep paralysis does. Basically, when I was 4 I dreamt I had woken up in the middle of the night. It was dark and the only light I had on was a nightlight at the end of my bed. I saw a mangled, disgusting looking hand grab my sheets and this creature sat hunched at the edge of my bed looking at me. This creature looked a bit like the rake, but if it was merged with a hairless dog. It was humanoid, very skinny, but had a dog-like face. I remember it just sat and stared at me and eventually I got so scared I just hid under my blanket and woke up later. For context, I never watched anything scary that would have prompted the dream because I was an only child and my parents were very protective. The next time I had this reoccurring dream was when I was 15. We had just moved into our newest house and I was sleeping in my new room alone. This time the dream felt more like sleep paralysis because I couldn't move. The creature sat on the edge of my new bed, looking at me for a while. Then it started to crawl up towards my legs slowly. By the time it got to around my thighs I woke up. This was probably my first time having the stereotypical sleep paralysis. The next, and hopefully last time, I had this experience was when I was 18. I was sleeping in the same bed at said house we moved into when I was 15 and had the last experience. This time the creature sat and looked at me like usual, but it started to climb higher and higher past my thighs until it basically sat on my chest. I felt as if I couldn't breathe, and it brought its disgusting muzzle closer, and I swear I felt its breath on my face. I endured this until I felt like I was suffocating and I awoke. But this time I couldn't tell if I was truly awake or not. I genuinely felt as if that the creature would scuttle on the floor and attack me. So I sat up in bed, for a decently long time, a couple hours maybe. I never checked my phone, or had any sort of electronic clock to look at and tell the time. So I sat up in bed full of anxiety and terror until my back ached and I realized I was actually awake. I didn't sleep more that night. For extra detail, my parents kinda believe in spirits and they bless every new house we move into with sage. This house we moved into when I was 15 was blessed by my parents. I told my dad this happened when I was 18 and he blessed the house again. I lived next to a railway crossing, and when I was around 10 they installed floodlights on the crossing and they shone directly into my window so I could always see silhouettes of the trees or something very clearly, like a puppet show. One night I had a sleepover with 2 friends. At some point during the night a figure appeared crouching in my window. My friends and I were terrified. In the point of context, there is nothing outside my window for anyone to stand on. The figure also had elongated body parts. The part I remember most was a pointy head. It stayed crouched in the window for a while and we hid under the covers and peeped out occasionally. Some time later we saw it jump to the side. I put this down to a dream. It couldn't have been real. The floodlight eventually got turned so it didn't face my window. My friends and I grew up and grew apart. At the end of secondary school I was getting people to sign my yearbook and one of the girls asked me if I remembered the thing in my window. I was shocked. I thought it was a dream, so I asked the other girl and she also remembered it. That night I told my dad about it. He told me the floodlights have never faced my window. I saw a shadow man. Person. Thing. I was 13 and I'd fallen asleep on the couch in my living room while watching TV. All of a sudden I was awake, and it wasn't a normal awakening. One second I was dead asleep and the next I was propped up on one arm, looking up at a shadow standing over me. The TV had gone all statusy and the light was filling the entire room, but it didn't touch this figure. He was a complete absence of light. I felt like I could tell it was male by its shape. I couldn't see any eyes, but I knew it was staring at me. I could feel the eye contact. I felt like it had been waiting for me to wake up and notice it, or maybe it hasn't expected me to wake up and was surprised I could see it. I didn't feel afraid of it. I didn't even question what it was or why it was there or if it was dangerous. I didn't really have any thoughts. I just felt like I was waiting for something. After a few moments it reached out and touched my face. It just brushed the back of its hand against my cheek, and its skin was cool but not ice cold. And it spoke. It had a voice but I can't remember what it sounded like. "It's okay. You can go back to sleep." That's what it said. I don't remember going back to sleep or even lying back down. I just woke up again hours later, in the late morning. Creepiest thing ever, but also fascinating. I've wondered whether this was a shadow person or a ghost, or maybe a vision or a hallucination or maybe just a dream, but it didn't feel like a dream. I've never been able to explain it. I live deep in the woods like a hermit except for the fact my so and kids keep me sane. These woods are haunted. Have been since before I moved here. I inherited the place from my aunt. She left me a note warning me to salt the doors and windows. Shadow people are one of the common things I see out here. Constantly see them on my security and trail cams. Sometimes inside my house. I've been touched and scratched while smoking on my porch at night as well. The other thing that happens quite often is logs and rocks thrown at me, my cabin and my car. Recently my so was out checking on the couple that we rented a cabin out to that said they were being attacked by something. On the way back from checking it out and doing a patrol around the area he was calling me from his truck, lights off and not running, and he swears up and down after 8 years of this siege he saw Bigfoot. The truck still has damage from where the log was thrown and rocks hit it. We had only ever caught glimpses of them on cam before. Once my daughter started screaming in the middle of night and we ran into the room just as a massive figure hightailed it away from her window. We used to have dogs out here until something killed them. Early 2000s, I'm in Cub Scouts, the elementary school version of Boy Scouts, on a camping trip. I'm about 10ish around this time. I wake up quite late at night and need to pee. The bathrooms are a little ways away and I don't want to walk to them, so I walk over to the wooded area and start peeing on a tree, like you do. I'm about done when I notice a large figure standing in front of me. This thing is majorly tall. I would have put it at 9 to 11 feet tall. It had a pure black face that looked like it could pull you in if you looked too long. And the weird thing is, I wasn't scared. I felt perfectly safe around this thing. I asked it if it was going to hurt me and it didn't make a sound. It reached out and handed me a light gray rock that is what I assumed to be concrete. Which is strange considering that the only source of concrete was a road over a mile away. I think I blacked out or something because I have no memory of returning to my tent, only waking up there. I think it was some weird fever dream until I get home. I'm looking for clothes to put into the wash and there, sitting in the bottom of the bag, is the rock. As a kid I used to hate going to bed because almost every night shadowy figures would watch me sleep only when I had my back turned and was facing the wall. Or I would hear whispers and noises from my closet. I would feel something watching me, so every time I would turn around in bed to see what it was always shadowy figure standing there watching me sleep, but it would run to my closet once I looked at it. It had footsteps as well. Other times if I covered myself completely in a blanket, kid me thought it actually worked lol. I could feel something gently touching me as if to scare me. I would uncover myself from the blanket and nothing would be there. I shared a room with my grandmother. So I would wake her up and tell her what I saw, terrified out of my kid mind. She would just tell me it was an after-image projection from the TV. Lamau. I would go some nights without sleeping because of this, but would still hearing whispers from my closet. I've had sleep paralysis before, plus I usually always figure it out and wake up right away, but these incidents sure as hell felt really ducking different. I could move around and talk. Another time I heard evil snickering from my closet. I knew where everyone in my house was, small house. No idea what the hell that was either. This was really long back, when I was 9 or something and we'd moved into our neighboring city. Now this city was a real commercial hub and most people had their workplaces located here. Naturally, it was difficult for us to find a house, so after about a year of house hunting we found a place here. Our old contract was ending, so we jumped on the offer. It was on a high floor and had a great view of the skyline anyway. My memory is a little fuzzy, but this house was weird. I mean, I had some pretty great times there, but the building made you feel uneasy for some reason. I have some photos of the corridors, and even though they were well lit, the photos came out dark. The neighbors never opened the door and I had only 2 friends there. The first thing that we noticed about the house was that the door always rattled. It had a chain to lock it, so we kinda heard it all day. It was kinda pronounced at night though. To be honest, everything was elevated at night. I was in the middle of my 5 Nights at Freddy's obsession back then, so everything seemed so much pronounced to me. I could always feel someone watching. I used to do this thing where I blinked and looked at the burn image. I think it's called persistence of vision. Every time I did that, I saw a silhouette of a tall human. No defining features, just a black colored blob of a head. It was a while before I actually saw shit. The first time I thought I saw my mom enter the adjoining room. The house was small, so I called out to her, only for her to answer from the kitchen. My memories are fuzzy, but I think I definitely saw some shadow figures. They never appeared in brightly lit areas. It was always in the corridor and they were about 6 feet tall. I never ventured out of my room at night for some reason, not even to get water. Every time I tried I saw that black silhouette and noped. Once I made a deal with him that if he didn't bother me I wouldn't bother him, so I guess that's why he didn't hurt me. I also used to talk to him and ask him to make choices for me. Like if I should get the ice cream, please creak the windows, if not then don't do anything. Silence. Okay, then I'll just get biscuits. I think it was either my imagination or that area was a hotspot for shadow people. The garden out front always had them. That's why our parents forbade us to go up the stairs to the glade area. Creepy as shit, but was kinda normal. We finally moved out though. After that, the only other sighting I had was when a shadow guy stared at me from across the parking lot in front of the house until I flipped him the bird and shut the curtains. The only truly weird thing I've ever experienced. Years ago in the Navy, I had this really vivid nightmare while we were at sea. I was above decks, being chased by something in a terrible storm. Ship is listing hard, it's the brightest lightning, the loudest thunder, the coldest rain I've ever felt. I am absolutely certain I am alone on the ship with something. Just as I make it to a hatch to get inside, it corners me. It's this decrepit old woman covered in seaweed. She cackles and lunges for me as I wake up. Gasp awake in a fit of panic followed by lingering dread. Anyway, I convince myself that my D&D obsessed brain just conjured up an old school sea hag and go back to sleep. Next morning though, getting ready for watch and another guy in the berthing is telling someone, must have been something bad at chow last night, making me have dreams about some seaweed witch. Then this younger dude pops around the corner like, you too? I didn't say shit, pieced out of there to take my watch and tried not to think about it. I was in rural Louisiana one night outside smoking a cigarette when I saw what I thought were 2 helicopters, side by side, in the distance. I thought they were helicopters because they had these lights that appeared to be circling. I thought that they must be on the ends of the blades. They started coming my direction, then seemed to meld together into one sort of strobing light. As it got closer, I could start to make out that it was a bunch of lights shining out and moving around. Once I realized that it was coming directly towards me, I ran inside the house and watched out the window in the direction that it would be flying over. It was a little higher than the treetops and the lights were too dazzling to make out a clear shape. It flew a few hundred feet over towards my neighbor's house, where it stopped for a few seconds. I was finally able to make out its shape. It looked kind of oblong. It hovered there for a moment, then shot kind of up a bit and to the northeast about a couple hundred feet, almost instantly, then shot straight up and disappeared. I have no idea what it was, but it never made a noise the whole time. I don't know what could fly that slowly, then hover, then shoot off like that and not make a sound. About 7 to 8 years ago, when I was 21 to 22, I used to try and go to creepy places or just random cemeteries and hang out to see if anything cool or weird would happen to me. In my hometown we have an old cemetery that's quite old and pretty large, so I decided to go to it at about 1 to 2 a.m. I parked to the side of it because the main entrance is locked after dark, and walked up the hill to the wooded area and walked into the cemetery onto the walkway that runs all the way through it. I start walking towards the bluff side and it's quiet and calm, no wind or rain, light pollution, etc., and I start to hear this whistle coming from the opposite end of the cemetery. That side is heavily wooded and towards the older graves that are there. It's faint because it's pretty far away and goes in about 10 seconds intervals. Sounds like when someone is trying to get your attention. Best way I can describe it is a high-low-high whistle. I hear it for a while and keep walking until the path curves around and faces the end and kind of pinpoint a general direction that it seems to be coming from, so I decide, wonder if I whistle back the same way if it'll stop? So I whistle back and it stops, then abruptly starts back up, but this time in quicker intervals, maybe every 7 seconds this time. But it starts coming from different directions, all spread out, but still distant. I decided to whistle back again because if it's random people ducking with me, then why not? This time it stops again and suddenly starts up even faster, and one after another. First it's north, immediately it's to the east and sounds closer, next second it's behind me and sounds like 10 feet away, and the last one before I bolted was what sounded like about 2 inches from my right ear. I took the duck off after that. I haven't been back since and I don't know what it was, but it gives me goosebumps and the hair on the back of my neck raises just thinking about it. Anyone have any similar experiences? I was driving home late one night, North Texas, rural back road. Not late, maybe 8 p.m. It was around late September, early October. The weather was pleasant, so I had the windows down. I was just cruising, keeping a careful eye for deer, meaning I'm looking way down the road to make sure I'm not gonna be caught off guard. I start squinting because I see something light, reflective. I realize where I am on this road, grew up on it, very familiar with it, and realize it's a speed limit sign, but something is in front of it, obscuring it. At this point I'm maybe 80 yards away. I slow way down. I'm thinking someone has leaned some planks against it or something, so I'm planning to hop out and move it, so someone doesn't get hurt. It's a curvy road, so if you go much faster than posted speed you will wreck. By this point I'm 50 yards out. I start to realize that whatever is in front of the sign has a strange texture. Almost furry, but not really. Just looks wrong. My mind starts running down the list of hairy things that are this big in the area. I'm coming up blank. Nothing should be tall enough except a massive deer or bear on its hind legs. There's been no bears in the area for probably 70 years, no mountain lions for about the same time, and besides, this thing is black. In fact, by this point I'm realizing it's the blackest thing I've ever seen. It's in my headlights and it's blacker than the black surrounding it. Just this black amorphous blob. Still my brain can't make sense of what it is. Until it occurred to me that some jackass could have put up an early Halloween prop just in an illegal and unfortunate spot. Then it stands up. It had been leaning against the sign, but it stood up. And it turned its head towards me, that weird undulating texture starting to become more evident. It wasn't fur, but it was like fur. It was like millions of tiny black needles. It just looked sharp. Everything felt sharp. The air felt prickly, kinda like before an electrical thunderstorm. I felt extremely uneasy. Its head turned to face me and the only feature I could make out were 2 eyes that were red hot. Not red like LEDs, red like a piece of metal, right out of a blacksmith's forge. Like hot glowing red. At this point I'm maybe 8 yards out, and I'm frantically rolling up my window. It looks at me, or at least at the car, as it stalks off into the brush. I book it, pedal to the floor. I'm racking my brain trying to figure out what the hell I just saw, but my brain is refusing to process it. I call my Sighting into Monsters Among Us podcast immediately, trying to think of what I should even do. Then, I decide to loop around. I want to make damn dead double sure that I didn't make it all up. That it wasn't just a Halloween prop or a tree or a person playing a trick or XYZ. So I loop around and everything was normal. Just that innocent little sign posted 40 miles per hour. I later found out that all road signs must be posted at a standard 7 feet height, and this thing was a head and shoulders taller than that. For it to have been a prankster in a ghillie suit or something, he would have had to been on those stilts that Uncle Sam characters wear at the state fair. And let me tell you that where I'm from, there are plenty of gun toters with an itchy trigger finger that would shoot a demonic cryptid on sight, so people don't do that kind of stupid stuff. I still have no idea what I saw. I've drawn it several times, from what I remember, but I only saw it for maybe a total of 9 or 10 seconds, and I only realized it was something weird and alive for maybe 6. And before you ask, yes, I went for my camera on my phone, and I couldn't get it to open before it was gone. I grew up in Scotland and was very outdoorsy as a kid and through my teens. I'd spend a lot of time alone in woods and on mountains just wandering around, and around 2012 or so I had an encounter with what's termed Mfair Lia Mor, prawn. Mfair Lia Mor, which literally means the big gray man. If you look at the Wikipedia page for this cryptid, you'll see it's encountered on Ben Macdui, a fairly remote mountain, and second highest in the UK, in the Cairngorms. I had my encounter on a different mountain, and in deep woodland, but I'm convinced it was the same thing. I was in thick spruce woodland, in a very uninteresting place in the middle of nowhere really. It was around 7 or 8 p.m., and nice enough weather, and I was on my own. Suddenly from nowhere I heard a sound that at first I thought was a swarm of bees, extremely loud and not from any particular direction. Then I listened to it more, and even at the time I remember likening it to the whirring sound a bicycle wheel can make at high speed, but incredibly intense. And along with all of this was the sensation of some great unseen presence moving past. So intense in fact was the sound and the feeling/pressure of this unseen thing, that I found I literally couldn't move. I've no idea how long it lasted for, probably no more than a minute or two, and then it passed and all was silent again. Now I had read about the Mfair Lia before this point, but only in very general terms while looking into local folklore and monsters of the world and the like. It wasn't until years later I looked at more in-depth, and/or delusional, websites about this kind of thing that I found out it's often accompanied by a buzzing sound. Common enough in fact that the sound even has a name, the singing. I don't think what I experienced was any kind of actual entity, probably some kind of oral hallucination brought on from the solitude and maybe the wind affecting some kind of infrasound effect maybe? I don't know nearly enough about it, but it seems the most likely explanation. Years ago, when I was 28, I moved out west to Calgary, Alberta. My best friend was out there, so when I got there he took me up to the mountains for my first time. He had a 4x4 so we went up some crazy logging roads to burn a spliff in the mountains and chill watching the sunset. When we're up there, I got out of the truck to pee, which immediately meant my buddy playing the fool and locking me out while cracking off that I was peeing in a grizzly bear's living room as there was actual bear shit all around. Being stoned I was chuckling and thinking bullshit. Then my buddy drove away. Ducker. He didn't go far, but he shut his truck down so I couldn't see or hear him. Me being cool I literally a smoke and just stood there admiring the view as the sun set. Wow, did it get dark so fast. I realize I can smell something awful and I'm trying to figure out if it's always been there and I just noticed or if it's new and I'm noticing. I'm nervous now, scared as duck actually, so I light another smoke in the dark. This is when my buddy pulls up from an embankment behind me. I see I shine reflection in front of me. Thing is, the eyes were yellow and high off the ground like 8 to 10 in the trees about 10 feet from me. My buddy hit his floodlights and revealed a huge silhouette that immediately disappeared to the ground. I don't know what happened next, but I was in the truck in a plot second, beside my buddy who was wide-eyed and mouth agape. We got out of there in serious speed and the only word said was "Did you?" and "Duck, duck, duck, shut up, I don't want to know." We were terrified and we did never go back to the area and always felt like we escaped a serious situation. Hunting early one morning in eastern NC. Probably 4:30 a.m., pitch black in the middle or nowhere. I remember it was really foggy. My buddy had dropped me off via ATV close to where my stand was and I was walking to it. Birds were chirping. I'm getting closer to my destination but the fog was getting bad and my headlamp is just making it worse. About halfway to my stand area I get this weird feeling, like I'm being watched or stalked. Not by an animal, mind you. I've had run-ins with cougars and this was a different feeling. This was like cosmic horror. Some H.P. Lovecraft type shit. My ears started ringing. I had my rifle and also a large caliber sidearm that I always carry in the woods. I remember my first instinct was to draw the sidearm, but another instinct told me that it wouldn't do any good. I remember having this feeling of dread and just terror. I got turned around a bit during all this and the fog made it even worse. I decided to just crouch by a large tree and wait till the sun provided some light. I sat there, crouched, with a pistol in my hand, in total darkness and fear for a good hour. I remember looking down at the pistol and thinking I may as well have a Nerf gun. I felt that whatever it was, 10mm rounds wouldn't work on it. I also noticed the birds stopped chirping and there was this weird feeling in the air. Like before it snows, the air is like electric, kinda like that. Eventually the sun rose and I knew where I was, about 20 feet from my stand. To this day have no idea what that was all about, but something was up. I've felt fear before, fear from humans/animals. This was different and I'll never forget it. I lived in Vail, Arizona from the ages of about 12 to 18. The area, at the time, was just a lot of empty desert with a few housing developments in between. We used to spend hours walking through the washes and mountains, and before this experience I never felt uneasy being out there. But then my junior year of high school, sightings of something we'd lovingly nicknamed the Vail Alien, made my view of the desert change permanently. I personally only saw it once. It was around 10 p.m. and my then boyfriend was driving me home from a friend's house in the boonies. We were going down this dirt road that forked at the end, and as we were going right I saw something just off the path lurking behind a patch of cacti and bushes. It was freakishly tall, compared to the saguaro next to it, and at first I thought it was just a dark mass, but as the headlights drifted past it I saw a bit more detail. It had these long gangly limbs and a disproportionately small head with earth-toned skin. It was completely still, almost eerily so, and I saw the reflection from our headlights in its eyes. I don't know how to describe it, but just the sight of this thing triggered such an immense feeling of dread and anxiety, that my vision blurred and my heart thrummed in my ears. I screamed at my then boyfriend, "Drive! Drive!" And he sped up without hesitation. He asked me what happened and why I was so shaken up. I explained to him what I saw, but I guess he'd been too focused on driving, and then me freaking out, that he didn't see it. I mentioned it to our friend, whose house we'd been driving home from that night, when he suddenly got really pale. He then told me that only a few nights before, he and his mom had come home late and when they got inside, they could hear very loud and deliberate footsteps through the ceiling. Some of the older houses in Arizona are single-story adobes with flat, stone roofing. That's what his house was like, so they immediately assumed someone was up there and trying to break in, or was interrupted. He said he'd gotten his gun and ran outside just in time to see that thing disappearing into the desert. A few others around the area had their own accounts and experiences with the Valian, theirs being much more frightening than my own. If y'all want to hear them I will happily oblige. This story happened to me about 12 years ago. I was around 24 at the time. I worked hospitality, so it'd be later at night when my friends and I hung out. So, at around 9 o'clock my friend and I decided to go for a drive, someplace we've never been, just get in the car and go. I offered, and wanted to, drive because my mother was out of town and I was using her Mercedes. It was one of those early 90s E-bodies, the ones that were big piles of heavy steel, a real tank of a car. I only mention the car body because it becomes relevant later in the story. He happily agreed and we hit the road. We lived near Milwaukee, Wisconsin at the time. Good old Wisconsin, where you get a lot of really good stories out of. I've noticed, it seems to be a pretty paranormal state. Either way, we drive north out of the city and drive for about an hour when I see an exit I don't recognize and decide to get off there. There was nothing at this exit other than cornfields, no gas station or restaurant signs, no visible light of a town in any direction. So we are in a place we don't recognize, but that was the point, just driving to get nowhere because the speed limit was 35 and we were in no rush. The moon was out enough that everything was pretty visible. About a mile into the cornfields, we could see two kids on the right side of the road. We comment on how weird it is because there is no housing or stores or even lights on a horizon, plus it was 10:30ish at night. Naturally we're two larger guys so we don't worry about anything, so I slowed down so we can inquire if their car broke down or if they were okay. As we pulled up, I noticed the kid in front's clothing. It was a stained cream-colored tweed-type shirt with real tattered sleeves and overalls with only one strap. He appeared to be maybe 12 years old. The second kid was taller, wearing a red flannel-type shirt, with old-times-looking khaki pants. However, I could barely notice the taller kid standing further behind the smaller one because as I pulled up noticing the clothes, I got to see the whole child fully and his arms were to his side slightly raised, almost in that iconic zombie way. But his eyes, I couldn't take my eyes off of his, and I did my best to mutter to my friend, "You're seeing this too, right?" His eyes were pitch black, blacker than the night, but easy to see as he stood there staring at us. I did not know what the heck I was seeing, but I've never been so frightened in my life, and I've had several odd experiences that have left me unable to deny that there is more in this world than what we understand. So we're stopped for a moment, locking eyes with whatever this thing was. It was no child, it was evil, I have zero doubts of that. We quickly agree to go, and fast. We are not going to inquire with them, this was straight out of Twilight Zone, and I remembered the hitchhiker and that was not happening tonight, no sir. So, we go and we clamor between ourselves what the dollar hash at and did we just see, what was that, what the hell was that? Still no signs of homes, just open cornfields. How these two kids could be there, I don't know, but I believe those were not kids. So I keep driving, and we get out of the fields into a wooded windy road shortly after, probably around 5 minutes. Here in Wisconsin there are random historical markers displaying in whatever year this happened information. I only mention that because I passed one on the curve, so I glanced at that. As I'm driving through a curve going about 45 miles per hour, a creature walks in front of my car, my mom's car. As I saw it, it was nothing like I ever saw. Its spine was tall, it stuck above the hood ornament as I hit it. It was a gray color and looked like nothing I've ever seen. It had a very tall arch in its spine, almost like when a cat hisses and goes on its toes, that kind of shape, but in a very tall gangly creature. I hit this thing straight on with the tank of a Benz. My friend is freaked out at this point, as am I, to say the least. I stop immediately, but now we're both a bit scared from the children of the corn, and now this thing literally within minutes of one another. We decide getting out is not going to happen, but I decide to stay in the locked car but use the car and its lights to see what we hit and make sure of whatever the hell it was is dead, and I needed to know what I just saw. I drive in tiny circles backing up and forwards looking for this creature, but after checking every inch within 100 yards and not seeing a thing, including not a drop of blood where I hit it, straight on with a Benz, making contact with its spine, body, and head anywhere. That was unnerving, and although I wanted to check my mother's car, that would be dealt with further down the road. We were not going to get out there. So we decided to head home at this point. 15 minutes later, before I got back to the freeway, and I needed to get out and see how bad the car was. As I got out to check, quickly, as I was not taking chances tonight, I noticed my grill was busted in, but nothing too bad. So I made sure it was secure and got back in as quickly as possible. My friend decided to stay inside the car. Recently, I heard of the black-eyed kids and freaked out a little bit. I did not know that they were a real thing. I thought I just saw a couple demon kids or damned ghosts, or I didn't know what to think. To this day, I've looked through tons of photos of supposed cryptid beasts and mythological creatures looking for what I hit, and the closest I've found is some Algonquin drawings of Wendigos, and they were very close to what I believe I saw and hit that night. It seems to me very odd both things could happen so close to one another to not be related. Possibly it was an evil area, or possibly a ley line, I don't know. I would like to point out I've lived in Wisconsin a long time, and it was not a deer or a coyote or anything else. What I hit was nothing native to the known Wisconsin landscape, and neither were those horrid kids. I will never forget either of those faces and just hope I never come across them ever again. At least 10 years ago, I was in the car with my parents driving home at night. I looked toward our way home and saw a light. It didn't look like a star. It was in the direction to go home, so we were going towards it. It wasn't moving, but the light seemed to be pulsating different colors the closer we got. It wasn't far off the ground. We started to get closer, and then we drove right by it after 10 minutes after I first saw it. It was a black rectangular box with different color lights on the bottom. Not far out the ground, maybe 100 feet. It also wasn't super big. If I had to guess, 30 by 20 foot. Drove past it and I was in awe. Looked back when we were driving away from it and it started to move, then within 5 seconds it flew off and disappeared at an insane speed. I honestly can't really explain what I saw that night. My parents didn't say anything, but I didn't either. They probably would think I'm crazy. Kind of just kept it to myself. I'd if my eyes were playing tricks on me. Am not sure what I saw.